Okay. All right. Hi, Elise. How about you go ahead and introduce yourself for anyone reading the OEL newsletter or watching the OEL newsletter who doesn't know you?
Yes. Hello, my name is Elise Siegler. I am a university scholar at the Honors Program of Baylor, who enjoys being in contact with the Office of Engaged Learning because you answer every question with not a no, that's too crazy, but yes, and how can we do that? So that's who I am and why I love OEL.
Fantastic. Well, it is crazy to me that you are heading into junior year. It feels like just the other week it was like bright-eyed, bushy-tailed freshman Elise, but here we are, like entering the 3/4 of the way done year, which is bananas. But at any rate, you had a super cool summer. So, could you describe what your summer looked like a little bit, and then we can start to tease apart how it came to be and what we learned from that. But just explain your summer internship for the outsider to the conversation.
Yes. So, with the honor of being a summer engaged fellow, I was able to travel to Athens, Greece, and have a split internship research role with a social enterprise called Threads of Hope that employed and empowered women out of human trafficking and through the business structure of a sewing social enterprise. And at that location, I worked as an intern within the business integrations and marketing and functions, and also alongside the women who are sewing and creating the products. And that was a perspective of what my studies are a major and interest is for post college of being in a place that functions as a business to care for people in transition or migration. And following that second half of what I'm interested in, migration, I was able to volunteer and have conversations with people who are currently in refugee camps in the surrounding areas of Athens by volunteering with English as a second language classes and then also kind of community time of just sharing tea with people who have recently crossed into the European Union and are living now in Athens refugee camp.
Wow. So tell me a little bit about what drew you to this project, the organizations you worked with, being in Athens, Greece, and kind of how the this came to be.
Yes. Well, my first interest of what drew me to Athens in Greece is because a bigger picture, being in St. Louis, my hometown, and America, we get to interact through different community events with refugees who have come from camps. And I grew up volunteering as a tutor, but then also working alongside like community programs through a local refugee center. And I just was curious, what is it like to live in a refugee camp? I heard this from my friends. I'd heard this from my like peers, and I wanted to see the atmosphere because there's something that comes in sharing another or seeing another's experience. And I was able to see that, and that transformed how I tried to learn or uh, engage with my community, knowing the experience of being a refugee a little bit in St. Louis and in the US, but the concept of moving and living in a refugee camp was completely unknown to me other than through stories. So I wanted to see the perspective of a refugee camp. So that was one step. The second step was my research looks at how can social businesses come alongside people in transition. And I started a social enterprise in St. Louis, and so we got to see how can businesses come alongside people when they are settling in a new environment. And another perspective I got to observe last summer with Office of Engaged Learning again was seeing how people can interact with businesses to stabilize themselves instead of having to migrate. And that was in the context of a Indigenous village and alongside a business. And so this was kind of the last step of like, what does it look like mid-transition and mid-journey to have the stability of a business? And that is where the element of a business came in for wanting to see and examine that within Greece. And then why Greece specifically? Greece is a place that is a portal there's a law with the European Union that this first country you step foot into as a refugee or asylee is where you have to file your paperwork. And often those southern Mediterranean countries are the countries that are most accessible to get just geographically when people are coming from Africa or from the Middle East. Greece is relatively easier to get to because of its proximity to Turkey and because of its proximity to the Mediterranean, lots of islands that it's easier to commute to. And so Greece takes in a lot of refugees and has been the portal for the EU. And so there was a atmosphere that I could see this transition. And one more element is within like what, and this is something I saw in being there, the fascinating part of interacting with a business in Athens that I interned at, That's of Hope. Uh, it was just fascinating to see how most of the time the women who had entered trafficking, it was out of economic desperation of not having resources or skilled labor available for them at the level of education that they had, which was very limited, and a need to find economic stability. And so the beauty of having and exiting human trafficking, the business could be that. And so all of these elements kind of incubated a location for this summer internship that was beautiful to just live in and see what does this ecosystem function as. Yeah.
Oh, that's great. Very well put. Okay, so I worked with you on the front end of this and throughout the summer and was very impressed with your spreadsheets and your plans and your budget and all of the things. So you did a lot of work to prepare. However, life is not always to be prepared for. Things happen. And so I'm curious, what was something unexpected that happened during your time in Greece that just, I don't know, it wasn't something you could have planned for, but ended up being something that really brought you new things to consider, or you had to pivot. Just interpret that as you will.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Well, there's things that you can't plan despite spreadsheets. And typically that is interactions with people because you have no idea who you're going to meet or who are going to be willing to talk with you as a foreigner who's going to be there for a short time. It's very, and reasonably, as someone who's transitioning and maybe is working through a lot of traumatic experiences, someone who's short term is a person that people are typically closed off to. Uh, and so in wanting to be transformed by hearing other people's stories, that has a level of vulnerability, and that's hard to ask of people who have come from human trafficking or a country that's erupted in civil war. Uh, and so then there was a lot of joy and excitement when those friendships opened up. And I think one of my there's two scenarios that I loved the most. Okay, so the first one was at work one day. There was a cockroach, and the aunties who were sewing do not like cockroaches, and they're like, ah. And I, from living in the Indigenous village all last summer, had become very accustomed to killing cockroaches, and killing cockroaches was actually a good day because it wasn't something that would poison you. Or yeah, so I killed it. And then that day, the aunties were so excited with me. I had become one of their friends. And they're like, oh, do you want to have lunch with us? And I hadn't had lunch with them yet because they ate later than I typically did. But I sat and joined them for lunch. And we just sat around their table and ate with our hands out of the food that one of the aunties had made that day. And they told me stories about their food and their kids. And it just was a beautiful experience to have this layer of we're interacting together in a way that I look at you and just have a joy to see of, oh, these are the beautiful things of who you are and the gifts you have. And they look at me and say, okay, this girl cares about us and this girl's here to hope the best for our lives and for our kids. So I think that was a memorable experience. And then another one that got to come later down is when another lady asked me to help pick up groceries for the work with her. And we walked. And on the way to the store, we saw an older lady who was maybe in her 90s carrying her own groceries. And this friend who is maybe in her upper 50s dropped her bags and went to carry the bags of the 90-year-old lady. And I'm just a bystander. So I pick up my friend's bags and we walk with that lady, the old lady, to the metro stop where she was going to, which was maybe a 7-minute walk out of our way. And after we dropped off the bags for the old lady and like said goodbye, I asked my friend, I was like, what, you did that? Is this just something you do? And she's like, no, this is like village etiquette. She had grown up in a small rural village in Africa, and she was like, no, this is what it means to be in community, is that you respect your elders and you care for them, even if that makes you pause your day. And so I think it's just interactions like that where we have these conversations of what is human migration or what is entrepreneurship or economic development. And it's easy to see them in big abstract theories because it helps us simplify what are these topics and how does this work with a lot of people. But those small interactions, I think, are beautiful to see how others can illuminate each other and bring out the best gifts that we have. And that if you give time to listen and share food and share your time and maybe even give up some of your own stuff and time, that our interactions have a lot of value. Yeah, so I think those were two things I was extremely grateful to have, despite or unknown on the spreadsheets.
I love both of those. Um, so you've been a part of the OEL since your early days at Baylor, because your older brother kind of encountered our programming and luckily roped you into it. So you've taken Learning for the World, you've taken community-based global learning, you've been a Baylor Engaged Fellow, and when you return from St. Andrews in the spring, you're gonna be a Provost Scholar. So you're doing all the things. While you were in Athens, what were some elements of the learning you've received through the OEL that you really kind of experienced in a much more embodied way? Our motto is beyond the classroom for the world, and you were very much beyond the classroom and out in the world on this internship. So how did you see some of those things you've learned through OEL programming really come to life in your internship?
Well, the beautiful thing with beyond the classroom is that doesn't mean you have to sacrifice any of the engaging and intellectual conversations. And I think that is the hope of OEL's programming, is to say, how can we take these curiosities and this community that we have within a classroom and invite it to be more than uh, the settings of Baylor's campus. So I think it's just sharing. Yes, yeah. How was the structure of OEL classes embodied? It was embodied in sharing what I enjoy, and also getting the opportunity to have people share what they love with me.
Great. Okay, last question. What advice would you give for other students who maybe are newer to the OEL? Maybe they just took Learning for the World and they're back for more or whatever. What would your advice to them be given your experiences over the years with OEL?
Mm-hmm. Follow what you're curious in. I think sometimes we can get trapped by checking off boxes. And maybe we hesitate because we're scared of new things. But in trusting the leadership and the support that OEL has, you are able to expand what opportunities you thought were available for you. And often I think that leads to more interesting and complex realities than what the box checking was going to offer. And so I think, uh, yeah, follow what you're curious in, trust the structure of the program, and lean into the mentors that are available in the program who are curious about similar things you are.
That's great. Thank you so much, Elise, for sharing. It is always fun to follow your adventures, and I'm sure we'll hear about many more when you return from Scotland in the spring. But good luck with all of that. I'll end our interview here, but thank you. Always good to talk to you.
Yes, you too.